Like when I was in school in the Soviet Union, we had like an option to take like theater and programming. And I tried programming and hated it and switched.
Hi, Anatoly. Welcome to the Gash Show. How's it going?
It's good, man. Thank you for having me.
Cool. Starting with the first question. What is your origin story?
Dang, straight to the straight to the origin story. So I'm an engineer by trade. Spend most of my career at Qualcomm, and that was really my first job out of college. But I went to school at Urbana-Champaign. I had like a startup that I was working on with some friends, trying to build voice over IP systems. This was like 2002, 2003 era, and we're trying to automate how phones work. And this was before Google Voice and Grand Central Dispatch. But if we had any business sense, we could have like made it that, but we didn't. So we kind of failed in college. I ended up getting a job at Qualcomm and working on all kind of optimizations, from like trying to optimize like the push to talk protocol to working on like operating systems. Like my last project there, like one of the big ones was helping like Google Project Tango, which was the first segmented reality like phone, work on a phone form factor. So like optimizing all the loops and like trying to figure out how we can leverage like weird hardware like DSPs and stuff like that. Um, like 2017 rolled around, and I was in San Francisco, and this crypto boom happened, and I literally had like two coffees and a beer, and I couldn't sleep at night, and I had this eureka moment that there's a way to encode passage of time as data, which is actually what a verifiable delay function was. But I didn't know what to call them, so, and I didn't know how to Google for them. So I thought I had like something unique and cool, and that's what prompted me to go like eventually start Solana, and like here I am.
Cool. What was your love story with coding? Like, how did you fall in love with coding?
Um, like when I was in school in the Soviet Union, we had like an option to take like theater and programming, and I tried programming and hated it and switched. And did theater instead. And then it was only when I was like in high school that I started. This was like in the '90s, mid '90s, basically. I started getting into programming and like trying to understand how these systems worked. Started building Linux systems, and like we had a C programming class in our high school, so I took that and wrote my, we I got to write my first like AI for a Tron game, which was like a which is pretty cool. So you had to like calculate what is the best path to take. Um, and that was like kind of a really interesting experience because I like uh, not understanding what these things were called. I like discovered the concept of a greedy algorithm, like taking a very fast like optimization path that results in the optimal outcome at the like in the game, but like having very limited information and taking like an optimal path given that. So that was like those were fun experiences. And then when I got to college, I like joined the startup, and we were building these voice over IP systems, and that's really when I learned how to code. It was just trying to like get a product off the ground. Highly recommend that as like the forcing function, because when you're trying to like achieve something like that you can use, even if the code you write is bad, like you get that measured success where you got something to work, and you can like then you're optimizing for something real, and like the experience that you get from that, and eventually you'll become a good programmer just doing it over and over. But it was very hard for me to otherwise translate like the abstract concepts I was learning in like discrete mathematics into into any kind of anything I was coding in like C.
Agreed. So how was your life at UIUC?
It was fun. It's a big school in the middle of Illinois, surrounded by cornfields, so mostly students. The engineering program was pretty tough. I was I'm not like the best student. I hate taking notes and I hate studying. I like building, so I was able to kind of get by on like a B plus B average. Just like okay, it was passable, but I learned a ton. Some of the classes that I didn't do so well at, like complexity theory and all these, and writing proofs and like trying to do algorithmic analysis. Later on, those concepts really stuck with me and became really important and later on in my career. So it's hard to like. I think the advice that I would give somebody that's entering college is actually don't worry so much about the grades. Like take classes that force you to get a bad grade because they're so hard. Like if you can, I mean, some people try to get like a straight A average and like really optimize for their career. um and that's like a a fine choice, but I had a ton of fun taking classes that were over my head simply because they sounded cool, and barely passed them sometimes, but later on really valued what I learned.
Gotcha. You've been a OG in SF like since like for a long time. So how is it being like how is the life till now in San Francisco?
San Francisco is a very unique place. It's very different than I think for an engineer than almost any other city in the world. And I think there's pockets of this, but you basically have a lot of founders that were successful and are in like exited, right? They like were early Google or whatever, or like early startups that had a very good success story that still live here, and they invest and do angel investing. And you have Stanford and Berkeley, and that provides a constant churn of like super smart people that are like willing to take on like challenges that are way bigger than they can chew, and like they just don't know how hard it's going to be. And that mix of like very ambitious like talent and like people that have seen that work, like actually went through that and like are willing to fund it, I think is what drives this very unique, really cool experience in SF. And obviously there's a bunch of other funds that are here that have like raised billions of dollars in capital or whatever, but those funds are like, I think, are like the follow-ons. They're here because of this like kind of cycle of talent and founders that are continuously supporting each other.
Gotcha. Uh, till today, like what has been your best and your worst decision?
Oh, best and worst. Best decision was forced on us. We just didn't have enough funding to build EVM support. So not worrying about Ethereum devs was the best decision. So we had the bare minimum amount of runway to get Solana off the ground, which is really hard because we had to build consensus and all the networking code and all the tooling, explorers, wallets, and unique runtime, like a different runtime than what everyone else was using, because that was necessary to showcase all the other improvements that we did. Um, so that attracted a unique set of developers that saw like something really cool and interesting about how this whole stack came together, and that allowed our own ecosystem to create its own, like companies like Phantom, like Magic Eden, that wouldn't have existed if Solana was an EVM compatible chain. So that was, I think, really kind of cool and interesting how that played out. The worst decision, I don't know. There's no like single bad decision or like worst decision. I think like in retrospect, obviously, when dealing with like FTX, I wish that like I had the foresight to see that as a risk to the ecosystem and not like place as much like faith or whatever on them like being like a good actor and a good builder, and kind of I think kept him at a distance. But it's really, really hard. I don't know if you're an engineer or a builder, you just kind of generally trust people and you're like, okay, let's just go build stuff. Right. And like, you don't worry about it. And like, I think it just doesn't come naturally to me. So that's something that I think maybe you got to watch out for in crypto or in business in general.
I agree. So like you're a software engineer for about 20 years, and in 20 years you shifted from a software engineer to a founder. So how is it like how is the shift from like less coding, more raising, and more management?
Yeah, so I'm a bad manager, and I think that's actually not a bad thing to be as a founder. So the way that we hired and managed was that I had like a early the early team was like all my friends that I worked with for over a decade, so I kind of trusted them, um, and I knew their skill set, so I knew what they could build. That's really important to kind of have that, like at least a couple people. And whenever we would hire somebody, it was because I would be working on something and I knew exactly how to do it. And it was just execution was the only thing. And then I could hire somebody and literally tell them, this is how I would build it. This is the problem. And like, go build it. And that meant that I knew that there was no risk, like in terms of whether this thing is going to work, because I was already working on it. I knew how to do it, so I could evaluate if they could do it. And I could see their progress, and I can evaluate how good this person is. And that gave me like all the information to make that decision early on. Okay, is this person like good in this environment or not? And like you have to, as a founder, make that like decision in 90 days, and that's really hard. Like firing people is hard, especially your first time. But later on, you kind of like get used to it, and that's not to be callous or anything like that, but it's really important on your startup to have like a team where everybody trusts each other to execute and build something, and they kind of know that we're all working together. And the only way to get there is like if people don't work out for whatever reason, is to let them go, have them go find the thing that works for them. Otherwise it's really bad for everyone. um, and management wise, you almost want to be at a mindset where if you need management early on, you're doing something wrong. That's like should be a bad signal. So you kind of want to have people in your team that don't need management, that you've established that trust and you know that they can execute well. And like it's really like startups should be under 20 people. Like it's like, and that's like even like, like your first MVP, like the thing that you're going to get to market with and prove product market fit, that team needs to kind of all fit in a single meeting room under 20 people. Everybody knows each other, and like you're in a super connected circle. And like you're just cranking. um, it's only after you have like product market fit and there's so much growth that you just can't keep up that you're starting to hire. And again, similarly, when you're hiring, it's because there's a fire that you're working on, and like the growth is just too much and you can hand that working process off to a new person. And you as a founder, you're the one that's taking risk, you're the one that's trying to build something unknown.
Got it. What are some of the work ethics and work cultures you would recommend to founders?
um it's so like bad decisions can kill you. Like startups die because they run out of money, right? So like um you have to be able to, and this is the really, really hard thing, so you have to be able to kind of ruthlessly prioritize what is the key differentiator about your product. And that's a really hard thing to decide on, because like you can say, okay, maybe we didn't need to build our own runtime, maybe we should have just taken EVM and maybe slightly faster. And then if people like slightly faster EVM, then you invest in making a super, super fast blockchain. But we wouldn't have succeeded had we taken that path. And part of the reason is that because there's a lot of competitors that were doing that. So you need to find that like unique key differentiator that really proves out your product and optimize for that. Um, and the other thing is that I think oftentimes it's not like people say that you got to put in like 80, 100 hours. It's partially true. Like there's a lot of work to do. It's you as a founder, like besides execution, it's just that you have to kind of exhaust every possibility of what options you're going to take, like really exhaust, debate them to death to the point where they all look good enough. Like they all look good and you don't know what to do. And that's almost like you've done your due diligence and you have a bunch of Pareto efficient choices in front of you. It's almost you're picking them at random at that point. You got to trust your gut instinct. But you have to get to that stage where you whittle down everything down to that like 3 or 4 choices to where they're like, you don't know if you can say, okay, not doing this is like as good as doing it, or doing A or B are both equal. So that's a big part of it. It's just really grinding through every possible option until you have like only the few that are Pareto efficient. Um, we actually like there was no like culture of uh, working many hours, but people end up doing that if you have that trust and like you give somebody a hard problem that you know that they can accomplish. People just kind of naturally engineering that they feel that pressure and they work on their own. But there was no like how many hours are you working or putting in or whatever. There was nothing like that. It just kind of became people did work a lot and they would then need to take a break, and you just got to give people space and trust them and just give them those hard problems that they can really put a lot of their passion into it. Like founders are driven by by everything. Like as a founder, you would sweep the floors, whatever, clean toilets, doesn't matter. Employees are motivated by different things. They do get that like I'm building something spark, but you have to give them really really impactful work, like work that is like what you as a founder engineer wish you were doing. I wish I was working on the virtual machine because I love virtual machines. Like, but I'm handing that off to somebody awesome because I want them to get that feeling and be inspired and like for them to crank it out. And then I go do a bunch of 30-minute Zoom calls for like 8 hours a day.
That's really insightful. Like how how was it raising a city? Like if we like Akshay wrote a great thread on like blockchain in the city, and like Solana fits like the best piece by like the amounts of grants given, the like hackathons and everything. Like, how is it raising a city?
I don't know if like people try to give blockchains analogies and stuff. I don't know if City is like maybe it's a pretty good one. The thing is that like you can't find your neighbors. Like you have your wallet, your Phantom wallet, and you have a your public key, and maybe you have an SNS name, but it's really hard for me to find like my neighbor wallet or like who is close to me. I think of it almost like Facebook is a social graph where you're like links away, and crypto is like a super connected graph. As soon as you have a public private key, you're fully connected to everyone, which kind of is actually like deafening because you don't know who to talk to, like, and find them. And like, we haven't actually established that cityness to crypto yet. I think no one has figured out how to like start building graphs and relationships and like bonding people. Um, and it's maybe a little bit happening in DAOs, but I wouldn't say that it's so strong that like I know my DAO friends. Maybe the NFT communities have like a bit of that because there are like if all you have is this DJ ape, you're in their Discord. You go meet up with them when you travel and like grab beers and that so that like I would say that was like the emerging thing that was the most surprising to me is that like it's an operating system with a weird social network component to it, and the that emerging property of having people just coordinate simply because they all have the same NFT or something like that was really really interesting.
Gotcha. What are some of the things coming along with Solana Saga?
The Saga, I've got it right here. Let me find it. It's really hard to build a phone. uh COVID really did a number on Chinese manufacturing. So I learned that the hard way. So the device is awesome. The sharing your having the same seed phrase uh, managed by the hardware between wallets is a really really cool experience because you kind of then like that was a really quick mental shift for me. That my Phantom, my Soulflare, all of my DApps on here all share the same identity that's tied to the phone. Just makes sense, right? And the UX of signing as like an Apple Pay experience also this just feels really natural. So that part I feel like is really really exciting. And when devs get it and they see this device, even though it's not perfect and there's a bunch of rough edges around the signing part and stuff like that, I think they'll get inspired. Like the stuff that I'm really excited about is probably dialect. They don't have a Saga app yet, but that's really cool. Like I think having messaging and that like being able to send NFTs and then like payments, but then also like DAO votes and a whole bunch of other stuff through naturally through the app and have people just have that super simple UX for signing stuff. I think it's going to be really, really cool.
Awesome. Right now, like most of the people use iOS for security and the camera. Like, why should someone like switch to like why should a normie switch to Android?
I mean, like globally, Android, there's actually way more Android users than iOS. iOS is dominant in the US and maybe Europe. Um, Maybe not even Europe. I think maybe Android still has the majority there. But iOS has like a very cachet premium, like kind of brand. Um, the only like a lot of people actually have tweeted that they'll get Android. This will be their second phone, which I think is kind of interesting. This is the only time Apple users have tweeted that, and that really shows the power of crypto. Like, if you care about crypto more than you care about Apple, you would get this phone, and that's all we need to start. Like, we don't need. It would be great to have a million sales, right? But we only need, honestly, 20, 50,000 units out there to Web3 enthusiastic people because when you look at like the value that's generated in DeFi or NFTs, it's not a million people that are doing this. It's maybe 25,000 active users on a daily basis. So those are the folks that we want to like enable with this device. Um, and obviously, you're probably buying this phone that's not cheap because you are a super Web3 enthusiast and a super Solana fan. So having those users as like your distribution channel is actually a better channel for devs than the big app stores, even if it's, not even if it's like 20,000 users.
Got it. What do you think about the Solana community now? Sorry, Solana ecosystem now and like in 5 years?
I'm amazed like how far we've gotten. It's just been always like every year has been really mind blowing. Um, Especially given the FTX collapse. It felt like, if a year before it happened, somebody said, this is going to happen, I would have thought, oh man, Solana might die. Like, but reality was that there's a huge community. A lot of the stuff is built independently in a much more independently actually than Ethereum. So MetaMask and Fura, Truffle, all of these tools are built by consensus. What's really cool in Solana is that they're actually built by different companies that are all have their own, vision and their own beliefs. So like Phantom is awesome, Magic Eden and like Triton and like a whole bunch of other companies all built this tooling on their own. Um, and are now like, sorry, one sec.
Gotcha. What do you think about Solana in next 5-10 years?
So having like, yeah, yeah, the having like I think like a ecosystem that's very much independent uh, was really really cool to see. And in 5 years, I hope it's even more of that. Like there is not just like like five companies that are broken out into that unicorn stage, but it's hundreds. Like that would be I think really really cool. And when you get to that level where you have you know 100 Magic Eden sized companies, that means that 1 to 5 of them is going to break out to that next level. And there's no company right now in crypto that's at that next stage. Like no decentralized company. Maybe you can say Binance's is that like at that next stage. But definitely no decentralized like native born protocol is there yet.
Agreed. What are your thoughts on the upcoming updates on Solana, like fee markets and Quick?
Well, I want to make sure that like the technology keeps going down like this path of continuously optimizing and improving. Um, it's not technology for technology's sake. What I think is really important in crypto is self custody and like enabling people to like use their private keys for stuff. Maybe it's transfer of funds, maybe it's NFTs ownership or whatever. But the really cool thing is that like it's users with their own private keys that can communicate in over like some censorship resistant channel. Like I think that's the really crazy part about crypto is not the networks. It's the fact that humans now have like consumer grade cryptography. Um, Once you get to like 500 million or maybe even 100 million users, you actually have a large enough market to where you start discovering like new business models that just couldn't be possible before. And you saw that with the internet. You saw like 6 degrees, like email chains, and then like Friendster, and then MySpace, Facebook, and it just was really those last two were like really really rapid. Um, and that happened when you had 500 million people on the web. Uh, and but it started when you had like 40 million. We're not even at 40 million like users, like Web3 users that know what a private key is and like actively sign. There's a lot of people that hold Bitcoin, but how many of them self custody? How many of them transact and like understand how a wallet works? That's really like I think the difference. So I hope in like 5-10 years, Solana is providing value to like 100 million, 500 million people that have self custody and are doing whatever it is that they want to do. And Solana is the cheapest, fastest way for them to do that.
Got it. What do you think about Solana community now? Sorry, Solana ecosystem now and like in 5 years?
Yeah, I wish we didn't have to learn it the hard way. But last year was pretty rough on the network. Despite the crazy growth, the congestion was really bad, and the load that we saw from because we're using UDP and like had no flow control, bots were generating like 100 gigabits worth of traffic hitting the block producer, which is like some people call it a DDoS. I think DDoSs get 10, 20 times that these days, but it's significant enough that I think it knocks out most infra. Um, a bunch of block producers didn't actually get knocked off, but when a third of the network does, you get into that like liveness failure stage. Um, what we learned during that time was that we needed Quick for flow control, so that shipped, and that prevented bots from sending them with traffic. And then we had to deal with fees, and there's some very simple solutions like mempools that do a pretty good job, but they cause fee spikes. So recently, even like I think was it last week, there was an NFT mint on Ethereum that caused fees to spike again to like I think close to $100 a transaction. That's we don't call that a liveness failure because the chain is still running. But if you're a business, a game, or whatever, right? Like you're not a DeFi project, or you're just some business using the chain, a payments company. You can't all of a sudden deal with access to the thing that you depend on for revenue to get to $100 a transaction. It just doesn't work. So the model that we really worked on was this localized fee markets to where spikes are isolated. If you have an NFT mint, uh, you can prioritize transactions by fee, but when you fill blocks, you also fill them by priority. But as soon as you hit capacity for that one event that everybody wants to access that NFT mint, 12 million compute units of NFT mint transactions get filled. You still have plenty of block space left. So you start filling all the other use cases. So that actually prevents fees from spiking because you don't end up in a war where a liquidator and an NFT mint and an oracle all need are fighting to get into the block. The liquidator is just watching their own thing. The oracle is just watching their own thing, and that's worked really, really well. I'm like, I couldn't be happier. It's very unique to Solana. It's been battle tested and proven out, and I think my guess is within 5 years, every blockchain that's usable by people is going to have something similar to this.
Gotcha. What are your thoughts on uh, Solana's hyper adoption, like dev hyper adoption?
Well, I think part of it is that like that road was paved by Ethereum, so it's easier to catch up. And that's, I think, going to be true about competitors too. People that are coming up behind might catch up to where Solana is relatively quickly, but it's still really, really hard. So I think what allowed us to get here was that there was something unique and interesting about the chain that was really, really fast in a new runtime and still decentralized. And I don't, like, I hope that you need all three to succeed, but we never know, right? So that part I think is really important. The the It's still like really, really hard to predict what devs like. Devs are really hard to like. They're not your regular consumer. It's not like you can like optimize for like customer acquisition easily, because every dev has very unique needs. But the one thing that I think has worked well for us was really going after like early stage companies, startups that are just entering crypto. And most of them have a vision that's not tied to any given network. Actually, they kind of want to build a product for consumers. And then it becomes, I think, an easier sell for us to show them, look, Solana's cheap, it's fast. You can actually build a really good product on Solana that you can't do on an EVM chain, because the UX with EVM is going to be dealing with MetaMask, is going to be slower, it's going to be weird. Like you're dealing with mempools and all this other stuff, and like there's a technology difference here that's very unique, while it's still decentralized. So that's I think is like, but we'll see. I don't know if that's going to keep driving developer adoption. We'll see. It's really, really hard to predict, and that's like the big unknown I think for the next.
Gotcha. How did you survive? Like, how did Solana survive the 2018 bear market? Like, how are they gonna survive? Like, if there is a bear market for like next 2 years?
Well, you have to focus on like the core product. So the 2018 one was worse because there was like almost no funding at all. You still have teams and projects raising money at like pretty great valuations. Um, the So I think we're like kind of just in a crypto's just at a different stage now, market wise. And the core part is, I think surviving is not as important as actually finding the growing mind share. It doesn't mean that like you have to add twice as many devs. You may only add like half as many devs in the next 2 years as you did the previous two, but it should be a bigger portion of the total overall companies or developers start building on in crypto in general. So what you're really worried about is like your mind share of the pie. Is it growing? Because I think crypto is here. Like there's enough use cases and like things happening to where it's going to continue growing, because every day another person installs a wallet and sets up a seed phrase, and then they do something fun and interesting and tell their friends, and that's just going to snowball. So within like 5 years you're going to have some breakout, MySpace level breakout, um, and you want to have the technology to handle that. That's really like the core part. So we are basically like not thinking about surviving, but thinking about how do we invest in the technology. So if that project doesn't pick Solana and they get that runaway success, they're going to be sorry because their competitor is going to be like, I'm doing this on Solana. And I both replicate the success and I outgrow them because it's cheap and fast and I can scale it up to 100 million users. That's really kind of how I think about it.
Gotcha. How did the chewing glass meme come along? Come along? Like, what was the story behind that?
Yeah. Uh, it's kind of an engineering meme. Like it's this problem is really hard. You're gonna have to choose some glass, And the I think what I heard about it in like Linux kernel, like operating system kernel development, like writing drivers and like kernel code is chewing glass. So the runtime when we launched, there was no anchor, there was nothing. You literally had an interface to programs that's very similar to a Linux kernel interface to a driver. So you had a single call that you could make and pass some data through. So to write a smart contract on Solana, you had to choose some glass at that time. With Anchor and stuff, I think you can now say you're kind of more like surfing glass. It's a lot easier. But in those early days, just the amount of effort it took to go from 0 to 1 was pretty substantial. But it was like the only next generation smart contract platform that was up and running and the only unique runtime. Like I think we had a like I had no idea that like if like I totally believe that if we had EVM support from day one, we would have failed. Like it would have been like a totally different culture, totally different chain. We wouldn't have found like the unique developers and like people that have that like big vision and like wanted to execute.
Gotcha. Would you like to have a multi-chain world or a one-chain world?
Um, I think it's kind of like a weird question because like it's very possible that like it's probably going to be multi-chain world, but not not like three equal chains that are all have the exact same use cases and that have split the market. I think that's probably less likely. I think you're likely going to have one chain that's does a ton of transactions that's serving a lot of normal users and like day-to-day user activity for whatever use cases, payments, social, you name it. And then you might have a chain that's like settlement heavy and all it really does is Uniswap and Aave or something like that. And it's got like 2, 3 DeFi protocols and it does very large volumes and like big transfers. And nobody cares about the fees or its throughput, but they care that it's there and it's got like a certain way to integrate with it. So that might be the world that we end up with, honestly. But would you call it a multi-chain world or is that a single chain world because most of the humans are all on one chain?
Gotcha. So do you remember Coin Mamba?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yep. So recently he had his like CeFi accounts closed, and like with also like FTX shutting down, like, and multiple other centralized exchanges and companies shutting down. Like, what do you think about like the CeFi to DeFi shift?
So I think we're actually past the point where exchanges were so dominant. I think I'd be really surprised if exchanges are like that important in the next 2 to 5 years. I think they'll be important because I think people still probably onboard fiat ramps through exchanges, probably the easiest way, and will maybe be important for trading and stuff like that. But I think the they just can't keep up with the number of different use cases and applications that people are building in Web3. They can't add interfaces to all of them, so they're part of the pie is going to keep getting smaller and smaller. Um, but they'll still be important. So for trading and stuff, I think DeFi will actually like grow after that application that maybe it's dialect maybe like 10, 20 million people start using dialect. um, that would be a medium-sized social network. That's not a big one, right? Like that's not huge for Silicon Valley. There's tons of social networks that size, but that would be very massive for crypto. And they were if we get to that stage where we're at that like medium-sized companies that are have commercial like viability in the real world are now also crypto companies. They'll pull in all these other protocols and DeFi applications and everything else behind them. But we need that breakout application that can get to critical mass. And I don't think that's going to happen in an exchange. And I think that as when that happens on a decentralized platform, exchanges will become much less relevant. So like you will have that like rebirth of DeFi. Like, and DeFi like will become the dominant way that people trade and like participate. But you'll still need fiat ramps.
Like what are your thoughts on like the current Web2 world, like the layoffs, like Elon acquiring Twitter and more stuff, and ChatGPT?
Yeah, Elon acquiring Twitter is kind of bizarro thing. I don't know why he did that. He's working on really, really hard problems, electric car and rockets. Why would you want to deal with people complaining about like where the UX position is of the retweet button relative to the view button? Like, come on, dude. Like, I don't know. It's a very weird thing. Um, I think layoffs are basically like macro driven. These companies are really, really big. They're major parts of the economy. So when the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, that forces major companies to shrink. It really, really sucks for the individuals. I like hope you weren't affected, but if you were, I'm sorry. And like if you're, just reach out, see if we can find a spot for you in the Solana ecosystem. But it's probably like good long term because during a low interest rate environment, like the big companies can borrow limited amounts of money and they can just acquire every small competitor, every small startup. Um, like, and that prevents those startups from becoming the next big companies. Just the bigger companies get bigger, and that's not healthy for tech. It's not healthy for like the economy. So it like distorts things. But that also means that those big companies can grow and keep growing. So when this free money from the Federal Reserve ends, they got to shrink. So it's just kind of part of the cycle.
What do you think about like Facebook getting into Metaverse?
Um, it honestly like is a pretty big bet, and it's founder driven. And I hope that Zuckerberg, Mark, like keeps at it, and like I think he's right in the long term. Um, like it's just gonna take a lot of work to get VR and AR to the level that you'd want this extra piece of hardware like on your table. I know, like I think it's just kind of awkward. It's just a little too awkward. Nobody has like a VR headset in their living room next to the TV. Like it like doesn't fit, right? Like where it fits is actually on your work desk. Like if it was small enough and you can like keep it at work and you put it on and stuff. So we got to get to a stage where they're like the hardware is better, and then it'll take off. And Facebook is really at that point where they have to think of themselves as completely winning social networking to the point that they've saturated the globe. It's like no other company is at that stage where they like won a vertical so thoroughly that they're completely there. I think they have to do something to grow, and this is like a bet that they should be taking. Um, we'll see. Like I'm pretty excited for the long term ramifications of this, like having the AR VR plus like auto generated worlds and like very kind of interesting auto generated like characters and stuff that you can interact with could be really like really fun. All of these things are happening at once, right? AI, AR, VR. Pretty exciting.
Great. Moving to the final segment of the podcast, what are some of the what advice would you give to like young listeners and bear market survivors?
Um, well, I think like bear market is the best time to build products uh, because you actually get better signal. You don't need a ton of signal to win. You just need really, really good signal. You need to find like your first 100, 200 super fans that love the product without financial considerations. And like when you find those people, you know that you have something, you're creating value for somebody, and they're paying you. And in a bull market, you actually get a lot of distortion because people will use your product in anticipation of some financial reward in crypto, whether an airdrop later or direct like rewards. And that's like a lot of those companies die in the bear market because the financial rewards go away and the product sucks. So this is the best time to build, and you will get like very honest feedback from the market. It'll if you do get that growth, that's really really good. And then even if you can't raise as much funding, you will be able to raise and you will be able to get a team and like get to that next level. And when the bull market starts, those are the companies that actually outgrow everyone and outpace everyone. Uniswap started 2 years before DeFi summer. Like you had to be kind of crazy, like, and nobody, and like, and to tell people, hey, we're going to build this automatic market maker, we know it's going to be for, and have the vision and like the grind and perseverance to go make it awesome, work in UX and find product market fit for it. So really, really think of it that way. Like the best companies start in the bear market, they build through it, they grind through it, and then they cause the next bull cycle.
Gotcha. What are some of the life lessons you would like to share?
I mean, I gave a ton of life lessons this whole episode. I don't know what else am I missing. Um, don't drink too much coffee or alcohol. Like actually, like quitting caffeine and alcohol has been like a pretty important improvement overall in my life because you're a lot more calm and you get more sleep. And as a founder, you need a ton of sleep.
What is like? Would you like to share any alpha like in the Solana ecosystem?
Some really cool stuff that I've seen lately, like Squads is formally verified. So they're using Connie formal verification tools to prove a bunch of properties about their smart contracts. And that's, I think, is really, really awesome to see because I think the building blocks for finance, for how these systems work, are going to be open source, formally verified pieces of code. It's really cool to see people start using the Rust tooling that exists for that. So that that's really really exciting for me. Um, go look at their code and look at those blog posts and see if you can start kind of formally verifying other parts of the ecosystem. I think that could have a lot of impact.
What advice would you give to a open source dev?
Um, I would like this is more to people that are worried about considering open sourcing. I think oftentimes early stage companies are worried that someone's going to take their code and product and like outbuild them and outpace them. It's almost never happens. I honestly have never heard of that actually ever happening because, and if it does, it's a sign of product market fit. Like it's a sign of you succeeding. Um, the thing is that like it's really really hard to raise funding, and like it's really really hard to build a credible business and like onboard users. And if somebody does it with your code, it's they could have done it without it. You might have accelerated them, and maybe you feel like maybe that happens, but it's really really rare. What's most likely to happen is that no one forks your code at all. Nobody cares. But if you're very successful, like Uniswap, and a bunch of people clone it, it's actually a great thing for your business because your your code and your implementation becomes the definitive version of that thing. You're like, you know, uh, I'm going to Google something, right? You become so dominant in the market that people don't call it an AMM, they call it a Uniswap at this point. And that actually gets accelerated because all the forks are equal and they're just competing on brand, and everybody, and that only creates more trust in the original like brand that created the whole thing, and effectively creates more marketing and grows your market share. So I would highly recommend people not worry about competitors or somebody like that stealing your code or ideas, and think of open source as like a way to accelerate when you have something really, really good, and really prevent competitors from ever catching up to you.
Awesome. Awesome. That's all the questions like those are all the questions I had. Thank you, Anatoly, for joining the podcast. Yeah, talk to you soon.
For sure. Thank you. Take care.